What's up and welcome to a disorderly quickie binge watching the classics. I think that's what we're calling it. I posted about it on the website this past weekend, thedisorderly.com. There's also going to be a companion post with this podcast, featuring some clips from the movies we're talking about, a YouTube version of this podcast. So please head over to thedisorderly.com to check all of that out. But let me just sum it up in case, you guys missed the announcement blog. So basically the American Film Institute, or the AFI, they have this list of the top 100 films of all time. They have to be American films. They have to have won awards, gotten good reviews, been generally popular in the time, or had some sort of impact on the films that came after it. That's the criteria, right? And this list is from 2007. So I think that the newest film on the list is the first Lord of the Rings, which came out in 2001. Anyway, as I'm sure most of you are aware, HBO launched a new streaming platform called HBO Max. And part of that streaming platform package, I guess you can call it, is Turner Classic Movies. So it's a lot of these old classics. And that's basically what initially gave me the idea to start watching some of these old classic films because, I haven't seen most of them, if I'm being honest. There's plenty of films on the list I've seen, but, the ones from like the 30s, the 40s, that's all new to me. Plus, this was in a time when I was trapped in my house, not much to do, Corona, quarantine, whatever, over the summer. And I just felt like it was going to be fun. And basically my entire approach to everything I've done with The Disorderly, MMA Mad, or any other sports or entertainment outlets I've written for over the years, I'm making content out of this sort of fun, lazy pastime activity so that I could feel less lazy about, what is essentially just sitting my ass in front of a TV for hours, right? Like if I turn it into a podcast series, then technically all that time I was wasting, now it's productive. That's my little secret. That's why I'm doing it. So here we are. You're listening to that excuse that I've created for myself, basically. Now, as I mentioned, there are 100 films on this list. The original list was made in 1998, and then they did a 10-year anniversary list, the one that we're talking about from 2007, where some of the movies are removed altogether, right? Some new ones are added. There's lots of jostling around of the rankings and whatever, but as I said, we're going to work off the most recent list. And of those 100 movies, I've now seen 25. So we're a quarter of the way through. Also, in fairness, there are plenty of movies on the list that I have seen, I just haven't rewatched them during this whole process, so I'm not counting those. Like, I've seen Jaws, which is on the top 100 list. I'm not counting it because I haven't rewatched it since I've started doing this, if that makes sense. Anyway, I'm at 25. I thought the best way to do this, rather than talk in depth about every single movie I've seen, would be to release 5 podcasts, a new one each week, just counting down to the best and worst movies of those 25. So this week, in a couple minutes, I'm going to reveal my pick for the number 5 best movie, as well as my pick for the number 5 worst movie, or the 5th to last movie of those 25 that I watched. The list of the 25 movies I've watched, by the way, they can be found on thedisorderly.com in that initial post. I don't know, Dave might add that list to this post as well, but if you go to thedisorderly.com, you can see what I'm working with here, basically. I'd also highly recommend you listen to the podcast Unspooled with Paul Scheer and Amy Nicholson for a longer, more in-depth conversation about all these films on the top 100 list, because that's what I've been doing. My routine, basically, I've watched one of these films and then listened to their podcast on it. So if you're into this stuff, I would recommend listening to that as well. But let's get to it. Let's start with the best. The 5th movie on my list, and by the way, these top 5 are pretty short up. Like I have 75 movies to go, and I think it's going to be pretty hard to crack into the top 5 now, even with that still ahead of me. But number 5, it's a 1948 film starring Humphrey Bogart, directed by John Huston. It's about 3 men who go into the mountains of Mexico searching for gold. The number 5 movie on my list, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Now, I loved this movie, and I particularly liked Humphrey Bogart's in it. Now, I had already seen him in Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, and, these are pretty clean-cut sort of standard protagonist roles. Bogart always brings a little grit to his performances, I guess, but he was clearly the good guy that you were rooting for in those other 2 movies, which I think is what made this performance so enjoyable. He's not a likable guy in this movie, like at all. He's almost bordering on being a villain in a lot of ways, as you see him just sort of unravel and really start to lose his shit over greed and paranoia during this hunt for gold. And it was really impressive. Just from an acting perspective, it was really impressive. In a weird way, this might be a comparison that doesn't make a lot of sense. I was almost thinking about Tom Hanks in Castaway. What made that performance so memorable was the fact that he was alone for the majority of the movie. You see him struggle with his own sanity and trying to survive on this island. And while maybe that's not the best comparison because there are 2 other people in the mountains with Bogey, right? He's not alone. There are certain parallels between the journey that Bogart is having in his own head throughout this film and the whole alone on an island journey that we saw in Castaway. Just a man struggling to sort of keep his grips on reality. This movie also sort of reminded me of a Twilight Zone episode in a lot of ways. You have this moral lesson about greed and karma. You have three people representing very different ideals and perspectives. The idealistic youngster, the seasoned old-timer, the paranoid Humphrey Bogart, right? They're all dealing with these obstacles and making important decisions in their own way. So as a member of an audience, you can see almost like an obstacle presents itself, and you can see the full spectrum of how humans would deal with this obstacle, because you're seeing all three people react from a very different perspective. So as an audience member, you can almost put yourself in their shoes and decide who you relate to, whose decision-making process most closely ties to what you would do in that situation.
I know exactly what you mean. You want to take it all for yourself and cut me out. I know you for what you are. A long time I've had my suspicions about you, and now I know I've been right.
I also have to give a shout-out to Walter Huston, who plays Howard in the film, the old-timer I was talking about. He's the father of John Huston, who directed this movie, famed director. You'll see John Huston all over this AFI Top 100 list. But Walter died just 2 years after the film was released. And he died unexpectedly, too. It was an aneurysm, died at 67 years old. So having that experience, both for him and for John Huston, acting in your son's film, or for his son to have the chance to direct his father. A great film, by the way. One that actually earned Walter an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. I mean, that had to have been pretty goddamn special. He was nominated 3 times before this, by the way, but this is the first Academy Award. So well-deserved, just kind of a cool behind-the-scenes little tidbit. Now, you can find The Treasure of the Sierra Madre on HBO Max if you're interested in watching it. I obviously recommend it. I thought it was a great movie, but we must move on to the number 5 worst movie on the list, also available on HBO Max if you're interested in checking this one out. We've got another Western. Now, I guess The Treasure of Sierra Madre isn't really a true Western, but given the setting, it feels like it is. So, I don't know, it gives off a similar vibe. This one is, however, a true Western. It's one of the newer movies on the list. It came out in 1992, starring Clint Eastwood, Morgan Freeman, and Gene Hackman. The movie is called Unforgiven, and it's one of the worst I've seen. Now, let me be fair here. It's actually not that bad of a movie. There's plenty about this movie that I actually enjoyed. That's why it's not further down the list. But I think the thing that really rubbed me the wrong way about this one in particular was that it was included on the list at all. It was so underwhelming. I don't know why this would stand out to the AFI, where they're like, "Yep, this is one of the best 100 movies ever made." Like, think about the statement of this is one of the best 100 movies ever made. And I think if you watch this movie through that perspective, you're like, "What? This one?" Like, I don't know. It was extremely straightforward, almost cliche in a lot of ways, which is excusable in an older film when you're basically creating these cliches. But for a film that just came out in 1992, the whole, old noble cowboy that gets pulled back into the game to fight an unjust cause, like all the shit, it was kind of boring. It was uninspired. But I don't know if I've ever used the term uninspired in context before. But there you go. Now it's recorded. That's pretty good.
We ain't bad men no more. We're farmers. How long's it been since you fired a gun at the man, Will? 9, 10 years?
11.
There are plenty of particulars that I could get into in terms of really nitpicking this thing, but I also don't want to spoil the plot in case you do want to watch it. So in the vaguest way possible, I'll just say this. I absolutely hated the ending. That was what really left a sour taste in my mouth about this whole thing. And to be honest, that has a lot to do with how I'm ranking these movies in the first place. A solid ending goes a really long way in terms of my lasting memory of a film. A bad ending also goes a long way, right? And this ending, man, I mean, watch for yourself, I guess. To each their own. Obviously, people love this movie. I think it's got like a 98 on Rotten Tomatoes, but God, I hated it. I hated the ending. I did not hate the movie. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's where we'll wrap things up. There's no reason to beat up on the bad movies too bad. I'm just trying to get the list out there to add some perspective, but it's still number 21 on my list, which isn't terrible. I mean, it's 21 out of 25, which I guess is bad, but there's a huge drop-off. Let me just say this. This movie and the one I'll talk about next week, the number 4 worst movie on my list, there's a big gap between those two. I don't like the bottom 4 a lot. This one I could tolerate. So I guess it deserves credit for that. Also, I just had to add this in because it's not a movie on the 2007 list. It was on the 1998 list, but it was eventually dropped off. And I'm just upset I won't have the opportunity to really destroy this thing. So let me just say it right now. Rebel Without a Cause stinks. It stinks. That movie was not good. It's far and away the worst movie I've seen. Not ever in my life, probably, but on this list, or I guess the previous list, this movie was so bad. I'm sorry if people are a James Dean fan or have some nostalgia for this movie, but I mean, God, it was bad. It was the acting, the plot. It was bad. It was a bad movie. And that's where I'll leave you. Thank you for listening. Again, please head over to thedisorderly.com for some clips from The Treasure of Sierra Madre and Unforgiven. Maybe even a Rebel Without a Cause clip thrown in there. Of course, there's a bunch of other great content coming from Volpe and Dave over there as well. And watch The Treasure of Sierra Madre, guys. Watch it. And I guess, you know what? Watch Unforgiven as well. It wasn't bad. It really wasn't. But that'll do it for me. Thank you for listening, guys. See you next week. Peace.